Patrick, welcome to the show. Good to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you, Michael, and good morning to you and your listeners.
Patrick, now, first of all, take me through the projects on the West Coast that you would have a relevance for the Fast Track Approvals Act. I've just made the assumption that of those four, a number of them have been mining. Are they all mining?
No, they're not. One, from memory, is a housing project, I believe. The other
really?
is I think so. One is the Waitaha Hydro Scheme, which is a run-of-river hydro project on the Waitaha River, which is sort of halfway between Hokitika and Harihari, I guess you'd say. And then the other two are mining projects. So one is a garnet and ilmenite mine on the Barrytown Flats, just north of Greymouth, on the way to Punakaiki there. And the other is an extension for the Stockton coal mine up in the Buller. So those are the four West Coast projects. And then, as you alluded to, there are mining projects in other parts of the country as well. So Waikato, Otago. And some of those 11 that I think you mentioned are also quarrying projects, which will be conducive to that housing and infrastructure, obviously, that makes up the lion's share of the Fast Track Approvals Bill or Act, as you alluded to. That first sort of tranche, largely in the housing and infrastructure space.
I've got a couple in Otago, actually, just quite close to me, gold mining ventures. Oceania and Macraes, I think, two gold mining ventures in Otago.
Yeah, the Macraes extension, and I also believe that the Bendigo Ophir project over the one that Santana Minerals is working to develop near Cromwell.
Yeah, that's the one. Listen, there is a suggestion, obviously, from environmentalists, from Liberal left, from the Maori Party in particular. In fact, I think the Maori Party have threatened people who are on the Fast Track Approvals Act, if they are part of that they will hold them criminally responsible should they get into power for God knows what, but that is the threat. You're suggesting exactly the reverse, that in actual fact for Maori, mining projects and the Fast Track Approvals Act is a good thing. Can you explain?
Yeah, so last year, on the very day that the Fast Track Approvals Bill passed its third and final reading, I don't know whether it's the Act yet. I think it has to go through its royal assent or some sort of illustrious process like that. But the Te Pāti Māori sent a letter out to people who are on the Fast Track list, and it was, as you mentioned, the bulk of 149 applications, 140 odd not in the mining industry. But the letter that Te Pāti Māori sent was to the mining interest and seabed mining interest, I believe, was what they had at the top of the letter, and basically warning that if you exploit the whenua, you will face the consequences. That was the wording of the press release they sent out and included in the letter, and effectively saying that any new mines that would be developed in New Zealand would be exploiting the land, exploiting the indigenous people of the country. But when you actually drill into some of the data on mining, both in New Zealand and if you look at some of the information that's available over in Australia, you actually see that there's a very high level of, in a proportional sense within the mining industry, there's a very high level of Māori participation. So going on Stats NZ's website and being able to find this information in some of the workplace and income spreadsheets that they keep, where they break it down by region and by ethnic group, you can see that over the last 15, 16 years, roughly a quarter of the mining sector's workforce would be Māori, compared to, say, 17, 18% of the general population. And you can see in some years that that's been as high as a third. And if you actually rank it by all industries, that's got the proportionally highest percentage of Māori as a percentage of the workforce. And then you sort of look at the extent to which many Māori choose to move to Australia and seek jobs over there, prevalence within the mining industry, and I would say excellence within the mining industry, because outperforming on income a lot of their peers within the wider population in New Zealand and Australia. And so you look at that data, and it certainly is not consistent with some of the rhetoric that Te Pāti Māori has had, both generally in some of these debates and also with that letter that they sent out just before Christmas.
You're also making the point that Māori earn more money in the mining sector than in most other sectors in which they work as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that's true of the general population as well. Mining is the highest paid sector within New Zealand out of, say, 15, 17 different categories, and that's also true for mining. So the average weekly income, from memory, I wrote an opinion piece on this last week, was about $2,400 for Māori, so that works out to the better part of $120,000 a year. The average Māori earnings was about $1,200 a week or just over across all industries. So, you know, getting close to double the average income. So it's not surprising that there's that high rate of participation and also that large extent to which many Māori migrate to Australia and make up a significant share of the New Zealand diaspora that populates the West Island.
So you're saying to me that the average Māori income in the mining sector in New Zealand is $120,000 a year?
Yeah, well, that would seem to be the case if you take Stats NZ data at face value, yeah.
Well, no, that's why it exists there, to make those sorts of extrapolations. That's extraordinary. I mean, these people, of all these Maori that work in the mining industry, got engineering degrees? Or is this just, no, it's just a well-paid sector?
It's just a well-paid sector, and a lot of that, I think part of the reason that New Zealand's got such a productivity issue, and you know, therefore we consider ourselves to have a comparatively low wage economy to our peers, and that's certainly the case when you make comparisons with Australia, is that we're quite a capital poor country. We rely on a lot of very labour intensive industries, so hospitality and tourism's a massive one, obviously, but even things like the construction sector can be quite labour intensive. But when you give people access to capital, whether that's in the form of factories, data and software centres, large earth-moving machinery that can extract large quantities of valuable things out of the ground, whether it's coal or gold or iron sands or whatever else, you're just making that person's hourly output so much higher, and therefore there's an ability and a need to pay that person a high rate of income to operate that machinery. And also some of the work, I think people who maybe haven't had as much exposure to it think that you just jump in a truck or you just jump in a digger and you just do the work. It's actually quite skilled work that does take quite a lot of time to cultivate the necessary experience. And the difference between you think of how many vehicle movements or how many times you may or may not shift a cubic metre of dirt on a mine site over a year. Having a good operator or a bad operator in the seat of that machine can make a massive difference to, you know, your bottom lines over a 52-week year. So, and I think part of the reason that we see a higher pay again in the mining industry over in Australia is that they've got larger resources, larger mines, and therefore you've got people sitting in bigger machines producing even more per hour and that sort of stuff again. So yeah, it's just a very highly paid, very high productive sector all over the world where that capital is allowed to come into the country and invest in that productive activity.
I've got daughters at university studying stuff that probably won't ever make them $120,000 a year, obviously wasting their time. Is there a perception problem that $120,000 average salary, that's a magnificent sum of money. And I don't have to go to university to get it. I guess I'll have to do some sort of apprenticeship along the line, but at least I'm still paid to train. Why does mining have a perception problem? Is it because the liberal lefties, the mainstream media, the sort of Wellington Beltway sector just regard you as destructive rapists of the environment, and that's the end of it? Because these sort of statistics should be in every school, for God's sake.
Yeah, the image problem, it goes back a long way. I'll get to the direct question you asked in just a second, but it's funny when you look a long way back. A few years ago, I was involved in a local operatic production, and I played Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, and the setting of that was sort of set in the Dust Bowl sort of era of the United States. And this particular version of Hades that I was playing was an industrialist that owned mines and steel mills and machines. And I learned in the course of just sort of dossing up on my character a bit that Hades, on top of being the Greek god of the underworld, was also the Greek god of all the wealth of the earth, including the minerals that come out of the ground. And when you think of what mining has involved for much of its history, it's involved going deep into the bowels of the earth, not having open cast mining like we've got today. So it's not surprising that people would associate that with hell and the beyond and being deep down underground. But
it's very lyrical.
Yeah, if you look back more recently, though, certainly it's not an industry that has been without fault. You know, even in New Zealand's distant and more recent past, you've got large machinery that in the hands of the wrong people, or just large activities, large-scale recovery of resources that can lead to exploitation of land. It can lead to pollution of rivers. Generally, when one group of people has sought a resource in history and another group of people have been in the way, it tends to have come down to who's had the biggest sticks to fight each other with, and that's nothing new under the sun there. And so I think all of that baggage the industry carries, and I think, around the world, even to this day, mining done badly can do a lot of harm, but I think in a well-regulated environment it can do a lot of good. And I think there's that image problem. And I also I sort of mentioned before that there's a high concentration of capital in the industry, which means that you've got a high productivity. But if you are someone that has got a sort of natural allergy to capitalism generally, seeing large assets that might be owned in a real or perceived way, it is a very distilled version of a perceived concentration of wealth. And so if you have an issue with that generally, then mining is a very convenient sort of Disney cartoon villain, basically. And you sort of... I've only come across one or two movies. The vast majority of movies or TV shows you watch, the miners are the bad guys or they're up to no good. And I've struggled to find any exceptions to that.